Right, it's 6 o'clock by my computer's time, and welcome to this meeting of the Harrow Planning Committee, the first planning committee held virtually, and the first committee that Harrow Council have ever held virtually. Can I start off by welcoming Marilyn Ashton to the committee after a long period of absence, and also Christopher Baxter, who I now believe has a first in that his mother used to be a member of the committee. He's now a member of the committee. It's probably a first mother and son combination on the committee.
Thanks,
so,
Chair.
So welcome to you all. If we need to, after an hour or so, I'll have a comfort break so that we can stand up, walk around and do whatever we need to. Can I ask all the members that are likely to speak to turn their mobile phones to silent and to mute the microphone on their device when they're not speaking? And all members of the committee should keep their video on at all times. For anybody on the public side that is listening in, this meeting is being streamed live on the Harrow Council website. It will be recorded, and the recorded file will be available on the council website either tomorrow or the day after. Now, should we encounter a technical problem where we lose one of the members of the committee, we will have a short break to adjourn while we try and reconnect them. If that doesn't prove successful, then we will proceed without that member, assuming that we are still quorate, or we will move to the next item if that member has a particular interest in the item under consideration, and revert back to the previous item when the member has reconnected. If all else fails, we will abandon the meeting to another date. There's a slight change to the way that we vote. When we were in the Civic Centre, it's done by a show of hands. So when you vote, I'd like you to say, I have heard all of the discussion and I vote to grant / refuse the application. So if we move on to item 1, attendance by reserve members. Are there any reserve members? I don't believe so. So can I ask all those members to introduce themselves? I'm starting with myself. I'm Councillor Keith Ferry. Gestamfer.
I'm Councillor Simon Brown.
Okay, Gestamfer, can you introduce yourself? I'm not sure if you're on mute. Can you hear me, Gestamfer?
Yes, Keith, is Councillor Gestamfer Ali. I'm here to attend the meeting and also as Vice Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Sachin, are you there?
I am. Councillor Sachin Shah, Councillor for Queensbury Ward.
Right. Marilyn?
Yes, I'm Councillor Marilyn Ashton, Stanmore Park Ward. I'm Deputy Leader of the Conservative Group and I am the Conservative spokesman on this committee.
Thank you. Christopher?
Councillor Christopher Baxter, Headstone North Ward, and I'm a full member of the committee.
And Charlie?
Councillor Ranjana Patel for Belmont Ward. I'm also a shadow portfolio holder for environment, and I'm a full member of this committee.
Okay, what planning officers do we have present?
Chair, I'm Beverly Cushar. I'm the interim chief planning officer. Also with us tonight, I will introduce Orla Murphy, who's the head of development management, and presenting the items for you will be Bettina Aneke, team leader for the East area, Sushila Bandari, team leader for the West area, Katie Parkins, principal planner, and Selina Hotwani, principal planner. They will introduce themselves as they present each item. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any legal officers?
Yes, Chair, it's Jimmy Walsh from HB Public Law here. providing legal service to members and officers for this evening's meeting.
Thank you, Jimmy. And committee clerks?
Yes, Chair. Wim Chela, committee clerk.
Thank you. And I think the only other person is Andre, who's looking after the IT. Can I remind speakers to introduce themselves before speaking, because although we're used to their voice and we can discern who they are, members of the public that are listening in won't be certain who is speaking at that particular time. So if we can move on to supplemental agenda item 1A, which is the appointment of Vice Chair, I would like to nominate Gasanfar Ali. Do I have a seconder?
Yes, I will second that. Simon Brown.
Okay, are there any other nominations?
Chair, I'd like to nominate Councillor Marilyn Ashton. I think as there are 28 Conservatives on the council, it might be more collegial if the Vice Chair went to someone from the opposition group.
Okay, can we then vote on that? All those in favour of Gasanfar Ali? I'll start off. I am in favour of Gasanfar Ali. Gasanfar?
Yes, I'd be pleased to serve again as Vice Chair.
Simon?
Simon Brown, I'm in favour of Gasanfar Ali.
And Sachin?
Sachin Shah in favour of Gasanfar Ali.
So we have 4 members of the 7 in favour of Gasanfar Ali. So I will announce Gasanfar Ali as Vice Chair until the next annual meeting of the council.
Chair, if we could be recorded as having voted, not that you've put it to the vote against that, for the reasons that have been given.
Okay, Marilyn, would you like to cast your vote?
Yes.
No, I actually wanted to second it.
Well, go on then.
Yes, Anjana Patel, and I actually wanted to second Councillor Marilyn Ashton as a Vice Chair, as she has got the vast experience of the planning committee for many years before, and I personally feel the same argument as what Chris Baxter has just said, that we have got 28 members, and I think you should consider giving at least a vice chairmanship to one of us. Thank you.
Okay, Marilyn, would you like to record your vote?
Yes, I'd like to vote for myself. Thank you, Chair.
And Christopher?
I vote in favour of Councillor Marilyn Ashton.
And Anjana?
In favour of Councillor Marilyn Ashton.
Okay, by my reckoning, that's 4 in favour of Councillor Ali and 3 in favour of Councillor Ashton. So I declare that Councillor Ali will be the Vice Chair until the next annual meeting of the council. Item 2 on the agenda is right of members to speak. I haven't had any requests from councillors to backbench at this meeting. Item 3 is declarations of interest. Have you got any declarations of interest? No. Well, I have a declaration, a disclosable pecuniary interest in item 205, in that I have an association with the applicant. I will therefore ask IT to disconnect me from the meeting whilst that item is being discussed, and ask the IT to reconnect me immediately after that item is finished. Item 4 is the minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of March 2020. Can they be agreed and signed as a correct record? Is there anybody who wishes to speak?
No, I agree.
I don't hear anybody. So when I'm next allowed back into the Civic Centre, I will sign them as a correct record. Item 5 is public questions. None have been notified. Item 6 is petitions. None have been notified. If there are any members of the public that have petitions, please send that into Democratic Services as soon as possible. Deputations, none have been notified. References from council and other committees none have been notified. Item 9, we have an addendum. Are we happy to accept that addendum?
Agreed.
All right, I don't hear anything else, so that addendum is accepted. Site visits, are there any suggestions for site visits? Well, that solves a problem because we probably won't have any site visits for the next meeting. And the arrangement of the agenda, all applications will be heard in the order that they appear on the agenda paper. Item 10 is representations on planning applications. I haven't received any objectors or therefore applicants to address us at this meeting, so we will not have any representations. Item 11, planning applications received. I will outline the process to be followed. We will have a presentation by officers. I have asked officers to keep this as brief as possible because we had a very extensive briefing by the Teams remote software on Monday evening at 6 o'clock. So most members, all members, I hope, of the committee are well aware of the contents of all the applications. After the presentation, I will request questions from members of the committee. Following on from that, we would normally have 3 minutes for the objectors and applicants. That doesn't apply in this case because we don't have any. And 5 minutes from the backbenchers also will not apply because we don't have any backbenchers. We will then discuss and consider the applications received, and then we will vote on the recommendations. I will remind you before we vote, it's done by roll call rather than putting hands up. So if we could move on to item 101, which is 38 to 44 St Anne's Road. That is page 17 of the agenda papers. Who is going to present that?
Good evening, members. Katie Parkins, Principal Planning Officer. Andre, could you please go to page 9 of the presentation? Thank you. So this application relates to 38 to 44 St Anne's Road. An addendum has been issued. The site is sorry, next slide, please. The site is located within the Harrow Town Centre, the Opportunity Area and the primary shopping area. The ground floor comprises primary shopping frontage. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. The proposed development is a second floor extension to the rear and the construction of an additional 2 floors to provide office accommodation. External alterations include new shop fronts. The ground floor would remain as A1 retail and the first floor and above would be B1A offices. The principle of additional B1A office floor space is supported by planning policy. It would contribute to the viability and vitality of the town centre and complies with policies DM32 and AEP 16. The design of the scheme was developed through the pre-application process and supported by the GLA design officer. The design size and scale is considered appropriate given its context and would make a positive and modern contribution to the town centre. Furthermore, the proposal would not have a detrimental impact to residential amenity. The Highway Department was consulted and raised no objections. The proposal complies with the relevant planning policies and is recommended for grant subject to conditions and a Section 106 agreement. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Are there any comments? Okay, if we can move to the vote then, and I'll remind you when I call your name to say
Chairman,
I heard the discussion.
I have a comment.
Yes, carry on.
Right. Just to say that from my perspective, I think this is rather a good proposal. And I think that the town centre is a good place for office use, unlike places like Wildstone. And so, as far as I'm concerned, I think it's rather a useful addition to the vitality of the town centre.
Okay, thank you, Marilyn. Are there any other comments? No, then if we can move to the vote, when I call your name, I will request you to say, I have heard all of the discussion and I vote to grant or refuse the application. We haven't had a motion for refusal, so it will be I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant or abstain? So I'll start off. I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant the application. Casantha?
I heard all the proceedings and vote to grant.
Simon?
Councillor Simon Brown, I've heard all the discussion and vote to grant.
Sachin?
Councillor Sachin Shah, I've heard all the proceedings and I vote to grant.
Marilyn?
I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
And Christopher?
Councillor Christopher Baxter, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
And Anjana?
Councillor Anjana Patel, I've heard all the discussion and I vote for grant.
Good. So that application is granted unanimously, and we move on to item 201, which is on page 53 of the agenda documents. Who's going to present that?
Katie Parkins, Principal Planning Officer. So the application relates to 8 Headstone Road. An addendum has been issued. Next slide, please. The application site is located on the corner of Junction Road and Headstone Road. Next slide, please. It's located within the Harrowtown Centre and the Opportunity Area. Next slide, please. The proposed development is an upward extension of an additional 3 floors to provide 6 flats. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. A similar scheme was approved in 2016, but it expired before the developer was able to commence. The design mass and scale is therefore considered to be acceptable. The proposal would provide an acceptable standard of residential accommodation and would not have a detrimental impact to residential amenity. The Highways Department was consulted and raised no objection to the proposal. The application complies with all relevant planning policies and is recommended for grant subject to conditions and a Section 106 agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Are there any questions? I just have one comment. On paragraph 4.2 on page 59, it says the initial public consultation period expired on the 4th of September 2020. Unless I've been asleep for an awful long time, I don't think we've got there yet. Should that not be the 4th of September 2019?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Right. Are there any comments on this application? Marilyn.
Yes, Chair. Of course, it should be noted that the fact that this is going to be car-free and resident permit restricted doesn't mean that nobody can have a car. But obviously, and I must compliment the legal department for the Section 106 wording. It's very important that would-be purchasers or tenants understand when the properties are marketed that they will have nowhere to park, almost certainly, within the vicinity. But it also should be noted that it has a PTEL score of 6A, which is very high, and therefore probably one would manage rather well without a car there. But I think it's important to make it clear that when something is car-free, you can't stop people owning a car. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Marilyn. Are there any other comments? Okay, shall we move to the vote then? We have not had a motion to refuse the application. Therefore, I'll start off by saying I've heard all of the discussion and I vote to grant the application. Casantha.
Councillor Gazanfa Ali, I've heard all the preceding discussion and vote to grant. Thank you.
Simon.
Councillor Simon Brown, I've heard all the discussion and vote to grant.
Sachin.
Councillor Sachin Shah, I've heard all the discussions and vote to grant.
Marilyn.
I've heard all the discussion and vote to grant.
Christopher.
Councillor Christopher
I couldn't quite hear you, Christopher.
He's gone muted.
Councillor Christopher Baxter, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
And Anjana.
Councillor Anjana Patel, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
Thank you. So item 2018 Headstone Road is granted unanimously. And we move on to item 202 Waltoncroft Cavendish Avenue, which is on page 89 of the agenda documents.
Good evening, members. My name is Selina Hotwani, Principal Planning Officer. Next slide, please. This site relates to a 3-storey arc-shaped building located on the southern side of Cavendish Avenue. The existing property contains 12 self-contained flats. The site itself is not designated, but the eastern boundary forms part of the town centre. The proposal involves the construction of an additional floor of accommodation comprising 4 self-contained residential units, comprising 4 times 1 bedroom units. It includes refuse and cycle storage to the rear. Next slide, please. 4 objections have been received in relation to the character and appearance, car parking, noise and disturbance, and visual impact. These have been addressed within the body of the report, and the officers consider the scheme to be acceptable for the following reasons. The proposed residential use would be consistent with existing and surrounding land uses, and the use of the land for additional residential uses is therefore supported and will make a positive contribution to the housing stock in the borough. In terms of character and appearance, the proposed additional storey would be approximately 2.5 metres higher than the existing building and set back from the edges of the property, so it wouldn't be highly prominent and would not harm the setting of the designated heritage asset. The proposal would be contained within the existing building footprint and, given the varied character of the locality, would be appropriate in scale and design. In terms of residential amenity, all flats would meet or exceed the Mayor's London Plan minimum housing standards, and the units are considered to be of high quality for future occupiers. The proposed development is contained within the existing building footprint and no flank-facing windows are proposed, so it would not cause harm to the amenity of neighbouring occupiers. Highways have not objected to the car-free proposal, and there is already a CPZ on Cavendish Road. The Planning Committee is therefore asked to agree the reasons for approval as set out in the officer's report and grant planning permission subject to conditions listed in the officer's report. Thank you.
Thank you, Selina. Are there any questions to the officers? Marilyn.
Yes, 2 questions. Thank you, Chair. Just for clarification, unless I've misunderstood, the occupiers, if they want to, will be allowed to buy resident permits.
Yes, they will.
Right, so it's when you say car free, not quite the same as the last one, which was, okay? Yeah.
Yes.
Also, just one question that cropped up when I was reading the report, paragraph 8.1.4. There's been some mention of the stacking arrangements. This is partly a building regulations issue, I know, but I think it's very important that is done correctly. And this has happened, sometimes when people put the extra floor on, it ends up disturbing people who were up to then on the top floor and nobody was above them. So I think it's important that we keep an eye on that condition attached to the planning permission, that the stacking is such that the disturbance to the existing occupiers on the top floor as it stands now is done in a way that minimises any disruption.
Yes, that is fine. And as you correctly said, it will be monitored as well at building regulation stage as well.
Yeah, but it is important that we keep an eye on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. Are there any other questions? Don't see anybody indicating. Are there any comments on this application? Don't see anybody. In which case, on item 202, if we could move to the vote, please. I have heard all of the discussion and I vote to grant the application. The Sanfa.
Councillor Ghazanfar, I've heard all the discussion and vote to grant.
And Simon?
Councillor Simon Brown, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
Sachin?
Councillor Sachin Shah, I've heard all of the discussion and I vote to grant.
Marilyn?
I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
Christopher?
Councillor Christopher Baxter, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
And Jana?
Anjana Patel, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
Thank you very much. So item 202, Waldencroft Cavendish Avenue is granted unanimously. And we proceed on to item 203, Unit 25, St George's Shopping Centre, which is on page 131 of the agenda documents.
Selina Potwani, Principal Planning Officer. Next slide, please. The application site comprises Unit 25 in St George's Shopping Centre. It is located on the second floor and is accessed via the main entrance to the shopping centre via St Anne's Road. It's currently operating in D2 use, occupied by Better Gym, and the site is located within Harrow Town Centre and the primary shopping area. This planning application seeks the change of use of the floor space from Class D2 to flexible use, including Class A1 retail and D2. There have been no objections received on this application. The development is within the shopping building and would not necessarily result in a loss of D2 use, but seeks to allow for the flexibility of using the unit for A1 purposes should market conditions warrant this. Both uses are considered appropriate in this regard. Other than potential signage changes, which are subject to separate advert consent, there are no external changes proposed. It is not likely that there will be any impact to neighbouring occupiers, considering that it operates solely within the shopping building. There have been no objections from Highways. The Planning Committee is therefore asked to agree the reasons for approval as set out in the officer's report and grant planning permission subject to conditions listed in the officer's report. Thank you.
Thank you, Selena. Are there any questions?
Yes, Chair. One question.
Samfa.
Yes, Selena. I mean, it's a flexible use. I mean, gym and the retail. How they're going to really separate it to gym and the retail business?
It's not that the unit is going to be separated. It's whether or not market conditions permit. So, for example, if they had wanted to use it as a D2 use as a gym, then they can. If they want to change it to an A1 unit, they can do so as well, without the need for reapplying.
So they will be change. They can change anytime they wish, you know. So which looks like a bit confusing, isn't it?
Yes, but it is just to allow some level of flexibility, so they don't need to keep reapplying for planning permission.
Good luck. We have to wait and see.
Are there any other questions? Are there any comments? No, I don't see any. Therefore, if we could move to the vote, I'll start off by saying I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant the application. Gasamfa.
Councillor Ghazanfar Ali, heard all the proceeding discussion and vote to grant.
Simon.
Councillor Simon Brown, I've heard all the discussion and vote to grant the application.
Sachin.
Councillor Sachin Shah, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
Marilyn.
I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
And Christopher.
Councillor Christopher Baxter, I've heard all of the discussion and I vote to grant.
And Jana.
Councillor Anjana Patel, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
So that item 203, Unit 25, St George's Shopping Centre is granted unanimously, and we move on to item 204, which is 47 to 49 High Street, page 147 of the agenda documents.
Good afternoon, Chair. I am Bettina Aneke. I am an East Area Team Leader. I am presenting the application site at 47 to 49 High Street, Edgware. The application site is within a district center and it adjoins a designated business use area. And just before I go forward, can I please remind the councillors that we had an additional comment this earlier today, which has been sent to all the councillors, and I will refer to that later. The site is currently in use as a banqueting suite, and the application site also on the lower floors contains self-storage use. But the proposal is for the change of use of the upper floors from the banqueting suite to self-storage use. The proposal also involves the use of the existing 26 car parking spaces for the combined use of the self-storage use. The application is considered to be acceptable because it complies with our policies, and we have also considered that the change of use from a banqueting suite to the self-storage use would be a better, would actually provide better amenity, will have a better amenity impact in terms of the adjoining residents. One of the adjoining residents had objected, and some of them had complained in relation to the use of the entrance door towards the rear of the site, and that entrance door is very close to those residential properties. Because of the impact of that the use of the doors could have if it's used for 24 hours or used on social hours, we had put a restricting condition, condition number 4, which restricts the use of that roller shutter door in order to ensure that the residential amenities of the neighbors are preserved. Apart from that and the other conditions which also would ensure that the use does not result in any additional impact on the residential amenities of the neighbors to the rear, the application is recommended for grant, and I will take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Bettina. Are there any questions? Are there any comments?
Yes, just a clarification, one comment. I mean, have you got any fixed opening hours, particularly in the evening, up to 8 o'clock or 10 o'clock?
Yes, currently the site opens till 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. in the morning, but the current use will have restricted the opening hours, as you can see in condition number 3. We have restricted it to 8 a.m. from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Mondays, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday, and on Thursdays is open to from 8 to 8 p.m. and on Sundays and bank holidays is 10 a.m. to 4 p.m.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
And Jana.
Thank you, Chair. I have a problem with this application, even though I do sympathize with the people who actually requires maybe this type of accommodation. But I think this is really kind of a low grade kind of an accommodation that is being offered here. With obviously, I would have felt that if there were men and women living together in their own rooms, but they have to share their toilets, they have to share kitchen, they have to share all the other
agenda item.
Sorry, Councillor.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, we're on 204.
Oh, because I turned my pages. Sorry. I'm so sorry.
Are there any other comments?
No, that one is fine.
Oh, okay. If we can move to vote on item 204. Yes. I have heard all the discussion and I vote to grant the application. Gasantha?
Councillor Ali, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant. Thank you.
Sachin?
Councillor Sachin Shah, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
Marilyn?
I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
Did I miss you out, Simon?
Yes, you did,
Yes.
but that's okay.
Sorry about that.
I don't mind going first.
Okay, Councillor Simon Brown, I've heard all the discussion. Vote to grant the application.
Christopher.
Councillor Christopher Baxter, I've heard all of the discussion and I vote to grant.
And Jana.
Councillor Anjana Patel, I have heard the discussion and I vote to grant.
Okay, so on item 204, 47 49 High Street, that is granted and that is unanimous. We move on to item 205, 326 Station Road, which is on page 170 of the documents. I've declared an interest, so IT, can you block me out?
Hi, Councillor Zanfali now. Can I just take over now? Yes. Officers, can we go on to item 205, Trinity House, please?
Hello, it's Sheila Bandari and I will be presenting this application. Next slide, please. The application relates to 326 Station Road. The application site is sited on the south of Station Road, and it's located in Harrow Metropolitan Town Centre in a primary shopping area. The ground floor of the current building forms part of the retail frontage of the town centre. The current upper two floors have a lawful mixed use for B1 and D1 use classes. The upper floors are accessed via a communal entrance, which is located at the southern end of the building. This application primarily deals with the third floor and the addition of two floors on top of the existing building. The proposal seeks to change the use of the first floor into 21 house of multiple occupation rooms and to provide 2 floors of extension for a further 13 rooms and communal amenity space located on the 4th floor. Next slide, please. The application has been, the internal space has been assessed against licensing standards as currently there is absence of any direct policies relating to HMO standards. All of the room standards and the communal amenities are acceptable and in line with what licensing standards are. The principal development is considered to be acceptable, given that it will add to provision of housing within the town centre. In terms of the design and character, the scale and the appearance of the development is considered to be acceptable. The height is incomparable to surrounding buildings. As explained, residential amenity and the internal layout, the standard of that is considered to be acceptable. And in terms of the impact on traffic and parking, highways have raised no objection to the proposal, subject to securing a resident parking permit restriction through a Section 106 agreement and to ensure that the travel plan is adhered to. In terms of sustainability, the application will provide appropriate cycle storage provision for the development, and the development proposes to provide acceptable level of refuse and servicing, which will be satisfactorily accommodated within the rear servicing yard. Officers recommend that the committee grant the application subject to the conditions listed in the officer's report and subject to the completion of a Section 106 agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Sushila. Colleagues, any comments or any questions? Yes, Marlene.
Can we just go straight into comment, or people got questions first? Because I'm happy to wait.
Angela, you got a question or comment? Christopher?
Comment. No, I'll go after Marilyn.
But I've got a comment then. I'm not happy with this, Chair. I worry that the accommodation is going to be far too intensive. As it is, we have difficulties with houses in multiple occupation, and I know this won't be a house, it will be a huge development. And the fact that licensing are okay with the layout is irrelevant, frankly, to this. This is planning, and we're looking at this from the point of view of planning policy. And I worry about antisocial behaviour. I worry about, frankly, residents that are unknown to each other having to share communal facilities. It's unlikely they'll get on, let's be honest. And I know that we do have to try harder to find places for people. I absolutely know that. And I think we all agree on that. But I like to think that we will give people some kind of dignity in the accommodation that we offer them by giving them their own street door, and however simple and however basic things are, that they should have their own facilities, their own little kitchenette, their own little shower room and toilet. And the idea that all these people are going to be sharing all this accommodation, these are not student digs. These are, and it can't be said that this is residential either, because it's so generous, because it isn't residential. It is actually, doesn't fall into the parameters in terms of planning policy as residential. And what we're going to expect these people to do is share all of this accommodation between them, all of the common facilities, people getting up in the middle of the night and, you know, having to use bathrooms and things like that. I don't think it's safe, and I don't think that's a management issue. And if I may, unless other people want to speak as well, I'd like to perhaps get this out of the way and propose refusal. And there are two reasons for refusal. One is about the actual accommodation, which is, in my view, completely unacceptable on this scale. And the other is actually about the scale of the development, because there's a lot of extra floors being added. And so the first reason is the proposed development would result in an unacceptable and over-intensive use of the site and would afford an unsatisfactory standard of accommodation to the future occupiers by reason of its layout and excessive number of people unrelated to each other sharing communal facilities. Contrary to DM1 of the local plan 2013, CS1 of the Harrow Core Strategy, and 3.5 of the 2016 London Plan. And the second reason is in relation to the building. The proposed additional floors are poorly designed and would be out of keeping and detrimental to the character and setting of the listed and local listed buildings in the vicinity. Contrary to DM1 of the local plan 2013, CS1 of the Harrow Core Strategy, and 7.6 and 7.8 of the London Plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anjana?
Councillor Anjana Patel, I do want to second that, but before I do that, I actually wanted to say that this is not acceptable, even looking at whoever is living there, to their life, what kind of a dignity will people have when they're living there. And I think this is actually, I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty because Marilyn has already said that, why and what not. But I would just like to say that we are inviting problems for ourselves by having such a large development and such a large HMO like this in an area. So I think this is absolutely not acceptable, and I second what Marilyn has just said.
Christopher, have you got anything to say?
Yes, it was just a general question for officers. Do we have an idea in mind of who these will be marketed to? I mean, is there a particular demographic or a particular market that we think this type of accommodation?
There's no specific demographic, although the applicants have suggested within their statement that it could be aimed towards key workers that work quite close to the hospital. I would also clarify that each of the rooms do have their own self-contained bathroom, so they're not actually sharing any bathroom facilities. It's just the primary kitchen and living rooms that are a shared facility, but each of the rooms do have their own private en-suites.
Chair, if I...
Yeah, Christopher, yes?
No, if I can just add to what Sushila has just said, this type of accommodation in terms of large-scale HMOs is becoming increasingly popular, and evidence shows that people of all ages have occupied it, and in this form. For larger schemes than this, there are London Plan policies that are coming forward, but I would stress that this form of accommodation is now accepted as an acceptable form of communal living. Thank you.
Marilyn, you want to come again?
Yes, I mean, there's another element to this, and apologies, I hadn't realised. I thought some of them had ensuite, but I didn't know all of them did. But even so, it's still unsatisfactory. The one thing I would say as well, that we have to put the proposal for refusal to the vote, I suppose. But the one thing I would add is that these are not affordable. I mean, you can't say that they are affordable housing. They're a different type of housing, and the fact that they might be popular elsewhere doesn't make it that we have to accept this kind of arrangement. These are not student digs. I don't think they're suitable. I think, and I've seen quite a lot of evidence of that in another role that I participate in life. I have seen quite a lot of problems that ensue from people living in this way. Because if there's a problem with sharing things in the kitchen or food in the fridge or anything like that, or somebody not tidying up and people have had a little bit to drink, you'd be surprised how quickly things can get out of hand. And, you know, we've had lots of cases because of these kind of accommodations of people with criminal damage and excessive alcohol and assault by beating and all sorts of problems, because it's very difficult to put these people together. So I really don't think the fact that these are popular is a matter for this committee. It's a matter of opinion whether or not they're suitable. And I actually don't think they are, not to this scale, not to this scale. I'm very unhappy about it, and I think we'd be making a terrible mistake to grant this.
Any other comments or questions, Sachin or Simon? Hello?
Nothing from me.
Simon?
No, thank you.
Yeah, I've got my comments because I'm the ward councillor of the area, and we had already a lot of complaints of antisocial behaviour, particularly on the College Road, these new flats. But in the evening, a lot of people come around, drink on the streets, throw their cans and bottles on the road. And this place is going to be right in the center of St. Anne's. And I've got very serious concern about antisocial behavior, particularly because down at the St. George's, there's a pub which is open 24 hours or late night. And particularly people living alone, they're bound to go out and drink. And I think I agree with Marilyn and my other colleagues. And so I'll leave it to you, Marilyn, now, what to say?
Well, I've proposed a refusal, and Councillor Anjana Patel has seconded it. So it's up to you, Chair, to put it to the vote, I suppose.
Yes, so to vote, I mean, to refuse.
Chair, Jimmy Walsh from Legal Services here.
Yeah.
Just very briefly, I wouldn't mind hearing from the planning officers in relation to how defendable these reasons, or any comments generally about the reasons for refusal before it's actually put to the vote, because obviously if the vote succeeds, then that would be the position of the council, and the applicant can clearly appeal against that decision. So I would.
Chairman, with all due respect, I'm sorry to cut across you, but actually, these two reasons for refusal may be differ from the officer's recommendation, but I can assure you that they are sustainable. And of course, the officers are not going to agree with them because they've recommended it for grant.
Yeah.
So with all due respect, I mean, unless of course things have changed in the time that I've been off the committee, I find that a bit much, actually. I don't think that's right. We've had a proposal, and I think it's highly defendable.
I agree with.
All right, I should go to Sushila to if she wants to speak.
Hi there, if I may step in, Chair, if that's okay. Councillor Ashton, I hear what you're saying about the reasons for refusal, and obviously the recommendation is to grant. Our role really would simply be to guide you in relation to the reasons, in particular relating to the planning policies that you've cited, because I believe that there are probably other planning policies that are stronger.
Oh, fine. If you want to put those in, I'm all ears because you're the professionals. But as long as you don't cut across the sentiments of those two reasons.
Absolutely, that's not what our intention would be. It would be more of a professional guidance in relation to the reasons and what planning policies we think would strengthen the reasons and safeguard the council's position. So if you're willing to amend the reason in relation to policy, that's all our role would be essentially. Obviously, if we thought that the reasons were unsustainable, then it would be remiss of us not to actually say something. But at the end of the day, you've put two reasons forward, and I think that they are based on set on planning grounds. It's just the policies that I think we need to address, if that's okay with you.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised that you would need to address the policies. I've had to catch up a bit on that. And I'm very grateful, but to be fair, I misunderstood when our legal advisor chipped in. I thought he meant that entirely the whole thing was unsustainable, and if that's not what he meant, then I apologise to him for that.
Yeah, Chair, Jimmy Walsh from Legal Services. Indeed, but the way Orla put it, and I'm sorry for any misunderstanding, but that was my clear intention. It's quite often that
that's fine with me.
Planning officers, by no way am I coming across members as regards you're here to make your planning decisions, and we're here to assist you in that. Process, and part of that was the planning officers making comments on and I did have in mind policies. I'm not a policy person. That's up to Orla and Beverly and the case officer. So that was my clear intention.
Yeah, because that's not what you said. Thank you.
Thanks, Jimmy. Everybody's happy, so can go for vote now. Vote to refuse.
Chair, do we need to discuss what policies to add to the reasons?
Yeah.
That's okay with you? So because this is located in the opportunity area, there are AAP policies that protect character, for example. I'm just waiting for colleagues because I'm actually disconnected from the internet at the moment in terms of the online support, but if you would be willing to delegate authority to officers to discuss the actual not the reasons, but the policy.
That's what I actually thought we would do, to be fair. I thought we would delegate, yeah.
Okay, because for example, one that jumps out at me in particular is reason 2. You've cited setting of designated heritage assets.
Yes.
And we have a policy in the local plan DM7 which protects the setting of heritage assets. So we would just want to work that into the reason.
No, that's fine. Yeah.
If you're happy to discuss after this meeting and delegate it, then we will discuss it and add the policies we need to add.
Would you mind terribly, and please, I'd like to perhaps involve the Vice Chair, Councillor Ali, in this, because he is, after all, the chairman for this session, for this item.
Well, I mean,
if you could revert to us by email and we could just agree it. Yeah.
Can we do it, or we can just defer it to the next meeting?
No. We need to do it now.
No, we'll do it now.
Chair, if I just can confirm what Orla has suggested, we will review the policies and the reason for refusal. We will send them to you for your confirmation, but we will be asking the committee to delegate that authority to me to issue the decision on the basis of those policies.
Oh yes, that's fine.
Marilyn, you agree on that?
deliriously happy, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Jimmy, is all right? Legal
sorry,
advice. Are you happy with that?
Yeah, no, that's correct. Sorry, just struggling to unmute. Yeah, no, that's fine. That's what I had in mind. Obviously, we need to take the vote, and depending on the vote, then that's
it would help.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. That's fine then, Marlene.
Well, don't you want to go round all of us and say we've heard the discussion and we vote to refuse?
You go for refusal. So
yeah.
Ed, let's start with you.
With me, okay. I've heard the discussion and I vote to refuse.
And Jenna?
I've heard all the discussion and I vote to refuse this application.
Christopher?
Councillor Christopher Baxter, I've heard all of the discussion and I vote to refuse.
And I also myself, Councillor Ghazanfar, as a chair, I heard all the discussion and I vote to refuse. Sachin?
Councillor Sachin Shah, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
Simon?
Yes, Councillor Simon Brown, I've heard all this discussion and I vote against the amendment to refuse.
Thank you.
I.e. to grant.
So it says 4 to 2. So we take it as refuse.
Yes.
Thank you.
It's refused, yes.
It's refused, yeah. Thank you.
Yes, that's right, Chair. Well done.
Well done. Thank you.
Thank
you, everybody. Should we call our chair to come back or we just close the meeting here? Officers?
Well, I think probably our chairman ought to close the meeting, Chair, but it's entirely up to you.
Andrew, could you bring Councillor Keith Ferry back, please? Hello, Andrew. Are you there?
Hello, I'm back again.
Keith,
we have Keith back.
Yeah, we have a bit of discussion, Chair, and it's item 205 is refused.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think that completes all of the items that we've got for consideration this evening. So there's only one item, item 13, any other business. I haven't been notified of any other business, so I will conclude the meeting at 6:58. Thank you all very much. It's been a very successful meeting from my point of view. Obviously, I missed half of it or so, and I thank you all for your participation. Thank you and good night.
Thank you. Have a good
Thank
evening.
you.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.